What's up, everybody? Happy Monday. Shad's not back yet from Germany, so I'm on the podcast myself again today. He'll be back on Wednesday. He's landed in Canada, and we have confirmation that he's back on our side of the pond. I know we got some big news out of Texas with Governor Abbott vetoing SB3, concurrently expanding TCUP. So today we kind of wanted to hone in and talk to those topics. Off the top, we've got Nick Mortillaro from the hemp industry leaders of Texas, executive director. And then after that, we're going to be diving into Texas, PA, and some federal news with Michael Bronstein. So should be a good episode today, packed with a bunch of state topics, and hopefully we can get some good information out on hemp and the futures of cannabis in Texas. But I guess without further ado, let's bring Nick up, Barnes, and get this going. How's it going, Nick?
Howdy. It's going fantastic today. Beautiful Monday.
Yeah, congrats on the news. I know we saw the expansion of TCUP, and then we saw the vetoing of SB3, which I thought that Abbott was going to just let it kind of time elapse and do nothing, as it made sense from a political standpoint. But to be honest, I mean, with the slap in the face for Dan Patrick after watching his press conference today and watching the reactions out of Sam, I'm more kind of happy that he vetoed it to elicit that response. So I guess, how are you guys reacting to this news within the state? And I guess before we jump into it, I guess for everybody that's watching, I know I had introed you as executive director of HILT, but you're also an operator in the Texas market as well, correct?
Yes, indeed. My background is in chemical engineering. I started with a lab in Massachusetts, actually. Nice. But after exiting that company, I returned back to Texas, where I'm from, and realized that there was a robust industry down here on the hemp side of things. And so we've been working in that space since 22. Okay,
nice. So, I mean, before the veto, what was the sentiment like? And I mean, how are you preparing as an operator? Was it were you guys confident that this would get some sort of veto? Or was it really just up in the air and a very just opaque nature of how the pendulum was going to swing in Texas relating to hemp?
Yeah, as always, everyone's got a different opinion. So some people were very confident, and they said they knew it the whole time. I think the prevailing wisdom was like you said, expecting a pocket pass for him to do nothing, and for it to go into law automatically last night at midnight, the governor not signing it. So it was a really, really welcome news with the veto yesterday. There was always going to be a potential lawsuit, and one has already been filed that would have prevented the law potentially from going in place with an injunction. But a firm veto from the governor of Texas, I think, makes a strong statement to some of the legal questions that SB3 brought up.
Definitely. I mean, I'm assuming you also saw Dan Patrick's remarks today about Greg Abbott wanting to legalize recreational marijuana in the state of Texas. Is that him implying that the hemp market will mimic an adult use cannabis market from the likes of what we see in, let's say, California or Colorado on the back end of this, with a clear bill that is not a ban? Or is that him talking about a state-run adult use cannabis industry like we're used to seeing in those states?
Yeah, effectively in Texas, those are pretty much the same thing, right? If you can get a 10 milligram seltzer from your local bar, a regulated hemp dispensary, for all intents and purposes, that is a regulated, legal recreational market. Whether you call it cannabis, hemp, it's effectively the same thing. And it is what the majority of Texans in the state want. So it is taking it in the right direction. And I think the lieutenant governor is really telling on himself there to say, hey, if that's what people want, they can vote me out.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't done himself any favors. The infamous news conference with the hometown hero bag of cereal bites, where he said this was going to kill you. And then in the same breath, a couple of hours later, he was endorsing the TCUP expansion program, which is all Delta-9 THC. So it's like, do you understand fundamentally what you're actually trying to mandate? And I mean, talk to me a little bit about the market. Like, are there any expectations of what the market's going to look like? Because from an outsider looking in, at least I understand that there's THC flower, you've got vapes, edibles, beverages, a wide variety of products. I mean, we've seen everything from the D8 sprayed Doritos down to the cereal bites. I know those are few and far between. There's a lot of good actors with regulated product in the market. Are there any expectations as to what the market could look like on the back end of this bill getting passed?
Absolutely. So before the lieutenant governor forced kind of SB3 to the forefront and forced its passage in the legislature, there was a lot more thoughtful consideration given to what a responsible regulated market would look like. And Representative King's office from Texas put forward a proposition called House Bill 28, which was essentially allowing for 10 milligram servings of gummies, beverages, and some potential flower, THCA flower, under that regulatory scheme. So I think what we're actually going to see in a special session, which starts July 21st, is returning back to where the conversation was already at, the negotiations that were already taking place. And I think lawmakers are just going to pick up from where they left off. There was a substantial amount of work put into that bill, cooperation with the industry, with lawyers, to make something that really makes sense, is safe, is regulated, is compliant. And I think the lawmakers will pretty much pick up where they left off on that one.
Okay. And does that bill nix synthetics in the market, such as, let's say, HHC, THCP, some of the things? I mean, from the chemical engineering background, I know that we've had some guests on before that have said that some of those derivatives create free radicals in the synthesization process that's just unknown within the product. You can get kind of wonky products with the synthetics. How do you guys look at synthetics from an industry perspective, and do you think that they continue to carry on the back end of formalizing the hemp market in Texas?
Yes, the important thing to understand is the difference between chemical synthesis and then the idea of synthetics, right? Synthetics are kind of an idea born out of a layperson's understanding of something that's created in a lab. But just because it is made through chemical synthesis does not mean that it is unsafe, right? Just because something is natural doesn't mean that it's safe.
100%.
That is pretty much where the conversation was at, and where the debate, there was a good, healthy debate that I think needs to happen in the legislature and between lawyers and chemists about what the limit is, right? And whether it should be defined by synthesis or whether labs needed to be regulated on their method of synthesis, or whether we should do it by potency, right? For example, THCP, highly potent cannabinoid, right? Even if it was made naturally, there's a strong argument to be made that THCP shouldn't be present in products simply because of its binding affinity at the CB1 and CB2 receptors.
Okay, so that's so. Do you think those? Okay, go ahead. Finish that.
Yeah, by contrast, something like Delta 8, which is actually weaker, of course, than Delta 9, if it's made by a regulated lab, yeah, sure, it's synthetic, but it's still safe. It's still regulated, and you can have lab tests that prove it's coming from a safe, well-maintained, compliant lab.
So there has been talk, let's say, from a regulatory front with some nuance to it, at drilling down to is it going to be at the point of production with the synthetics or the point of retail where they just nix the products all together, or it goes through more rigorous testing to where there's standards throughout the state as per these products?
Correct. And that's what I've always hoped for is standards for the industry. Third-party lab tests, the introduction of really federal standards for third-party labs that themselves have standards labs. We need standards, cannabinoid standards in this country to have really objective measures of what's in these products, their quality, and how they're made.
Yeah, trust me, on the state-run cannabis side, we want those as well. There just needs to be regulation around the THC molecule. It doesn't need to be a hemp conversation, a marijuana conversation. It just needs to be, these are the federal guidance and guidelines around THC. Let the products reside in the market. Let the competition decide who's going to be the victor, and just give the people what they want once and for all. Which is actually what I was alluding to a couple weeks back. I was like, Texas can be that, I don't want to call it experiment, but it can be that watershed moment to where it's like, this is what cannabis regulation should look like. And it looks like Governor Abbott is alluding to giving it that chance to be so, with the size of it and the magnitude. And I I didn't want to ban, but I did want to get a clamp down on synthetics and let's say the gas station stuff, which
Yeah.
obviously brings me to my next point. As an industry insider in the state of Texas, I'm sure you've heard a lot of the objections coming from the state-run industry outside of Texas. What are some misconceptions that you've seen or heard from people such as myself that just are inherently not true when it relates to, let's say, gas station cannabis, kids getting cannabis, just rampant synthetics and illicit product being sold through the channels? Like walk me down that road.
Yeah, I think the most common misconception is that it's pervasive. There are, of course, examples, as in any industry, of products at gas station, lower quality products, but the vast majority of these products are coming from really, really hardworking Texans, very smart people that have taken the time to build their businesses. I know you evaluate management teams and companies, across the nation. Texas has some of the best management teams I have ever seen. These are intelligent people. They know how to grow quality product. They know how to extract and formulate quality consumer packaged goods. And they are the vast majority, like 95% of the market. And specifically, this fight has really galvanized people to, wholesalers, suppliers, retailers, to look at the products that's on their shelves. In fact, the retail location I'm here at now, I've had infused Fritos when I took over the place, and we took those products off the shelf, threw them in the trash, and have brought in responsible brands since then. And that has really escalated and sped up in the past couple of months as operators are really getting sharp and starting to get in really high quality products.
Okay. And one thing that I've seen online, which I've only had the opportunity to look online as it relates to, let's say, flower. In the state-run cannabis industry, I go to Sunburn, I go to True Leaf, I get a full panel COA that comes with my flower. It's got mycotoxins, mold, mildew, pesticides, everything like that. If I go to any of these websites that sell THCA, Farm Bill compliant flower, it's only, let's say, Delta 9 THC, THCA content, and there's not that full panel. Is the vast majority in Texas, let's say on the flower front, are they providing full panel COAs, or at least wanting to provide full panel COAs to establish trust with that consumer and adhere to that degree of standards?
Absolutely. There's some great companies. Fresh Grown Texas, for example, is one. They do all 5-panel testing on their flower. Right? It's very high quality flower. I think what you're seeing is actually flower from other states, which may have had a 5-panel on it, right? But they only need one test to prove that it's hemp and bring it into the state of Texas, right? And so that's often the single test that you're seeing is the one that proves that it's hemp and is compliant to bring into the state of Texas. It doesn't mean a 5-panel wasn't done on that flower previously, but they only need one test, which is the THCA Delta 9 test, the cannabinoid profile, to show that it's compliant hemp product. Okay.
And with the current industry, I mean, it's a vast industry in Texas, multi-billion-dollar industry. I know people throw around 6, people throw around 8. How much of that industry do you think is going to be able to stay intact under the new regulations? Because I'm sure there are businesses there that just aren't operating above board. They might not have the expertise to operate above board and get grandfathered into, let's say, the hemp industry 2.0 on the backside of the special session. Like, is there a certain element of the industry that you think is just going to perish and the cream will rise to the top as it relates to the Texas operators?
And that's what we want to see, right? We want to see good operators play in the market, stand on business, really show what they're made of, and operate compliantly. I think the thing that you are pretty safely going to say go away is a lot of the vape products. Even with a veto of SB3 and some negotiated kind of regulations coming out of special session, Senate Bill 2024 has also passed, and it was signed by the governor, and that is going to make any disposable flavored vape illegal, including cannabinoid vapes.
Okay. That's good to know, because I mean, one of the main problems or one of the main objections we see is around vapes. It's around the vape product, and especially when you get into those synthetics. Also, side saddle with this, we've had TCUP expand or at least get signed by the governor
Oh, yeah.
to expand. Synergistically, how does that work with what's going on, let's say, in the hemp industry? And how is the hemp industry looking at that? Because we've heard I don't want to call them complaints, but objections around the TCUP program. It's onerous. There aren't enough outlets. There's not enough product. It's slighting the patients that are in the program. Is the expansion good enough? And is it something that's even wanted by Texans due to the fact that you are going to be able to get hemp products moving forward on the backside of the special session?
It is wanted, but unfortunately, it's nowhere near enough. Medical programs are important. We've seen this in states that have gone rec with established medical program. There is a need, right? If I am a real patient with, let's say I'm immunocompromised, right? I want to know that third, extra, fifth, ninth step that there are no mycotoxins in the cannabis that I'm consuming, right? That is crucially important to my health.
Yeah.
And while there is a very solid expectation of that in the recreational market, you want to be able to sit down with a doctor who is very well versed in your endocannabinoid system to understand these things, right? Specifically, what type of product do I want? Do I want something that's high in CBN, CBD, CBG? What do all these acronyms mean? And the recreational market can address those for some people, but I think there will always be a space for kind of higher end therapeutics through the medical market. So the TCUP expansion is a very, very good thing. It's very well needed. And I think, frankly, when they first made the program, they built it to fail. And it's been really sad to see that. So the expansion of TCUP is a very good thing. But I think a lot of veterans are going to continue to get the products they need through the hemp market, which is why you got to have both and allow the two to compete with each other. Have different customers that are going to go to each one. Patients are going to go to the medical, more recreational customers to the hemp market. And I think those two can coexist.
Okay. And just anecdotally, how has Texas embraced cannabis? Is that safe to say that it's because Texas is seen as a red state? I trust me, I know I see on Twitter all the time, tons of Texans have embraced cannabis, but has the general population embraced cannabis? Because I was in Chicago a couple of weeks back at Benzinga, and as much as I don't want to admit it, it's an adult use state. Walking through downtown Chicago, I could smell cannabis everywhere. To some that's intrusive. Others thoroughly enjoy that. I'm not bothered by it. I'm on my way, and it is what it is. Do you see that same thing happening in Texas with the prevalence of hemp and smokable products? And if so, has the public kind of just normalized that to a certain degree?
I think you made a very good point earlier. Texas has the ability and the potential here to almost, hurdle over the markets that have come before it, because you're seeing a lot of infused beverages, right?
Yeah.
That don't have any smell, that don't have any taste. You might go to a very nice bar and have realize, you don't think of it as a dispensary, right? But they carry THC infused beverages. And so I think as Texans have really embraced those cannabis 2.0, 3.0 form factors, and you've got a state where, of course it's normal. It's normal to go to the bar and get a beer. Why isn't it for me to get an infused seltzer? And it's really not as intrusive as I think you might see in maybe more traditional markets where they started. Flower was kind of the only or the primary product form factor. I think in Texas, you've got a lot of really great Texas-grown companies that have really knocked it out of the park with the beverages.
Okay, so would you say that Texas, I don't want to say predominantly, but it's more of an edibles and beverages market and functional products than a flower market as far as the hemp side is concerned?
A lot of people still love their flower. And that will always have its consumers. But you've also got a state where, people take their privacy seriously. There's a lot of land. And so they may be smoking tons of flower, but they're doing so in the privacy of their home, like most people do. So I really don't, if you walk down the street here in Austin, you really don't see it and smell it as much as you do, as I have in states like New York.
Okay. Yeah. New York, you can smell. New York, it's everywhere.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, there's ice cream trucks that are retrofitted to be dispensaries. driving around Manhattan. At this point, it's kind of ludicrous. How much, I guess, on a closing note, just a couple more points. How much friction do you think this process is going to get moving forward? I mean, I know Governor Abbott has booked a special session that's on there. You had alluded to the framework and already pretty much existing until SB3 got turned into an all-right ban. Do you see a lot of friction in the future as it relates to this, or this is going to be kind of an open and shut thing as far as Texans want it, Abbott vetoed it, we have something that would have passed muster the first time around, this is where it should be, and kind of regulate us, and this is what we want? Or do you think there's going to be kind of a long, drawn-out process?
I think it's going to come down to the lieutenant governor and some of his allies in the Senate, just how much friction they want to have. I think 80% of people, there's a very clear consensus on what reasonable regulation looks like. And if they let that continue, it actually should be pretty easy. And they can get the special session wrapped up and enjoy the rest of their summers. I think, unfortunately, with the press conference, we saw if the lieutenant governor wants to continue down that warpath, kind of stamp his feet and really, oppose the majority and the kind of rational consensus that most other offices seem to be coming to, it could be a lot more drawn out, and you could get a real fight.
How much power does he have in the state of Texas? Because to be completely honest, I couldn't tell you a lieutenant governor in any other state. I don't know if I've ever known one in Florida to be. And Dan Patrick seems to have influence to a certain extent. Obviously, Abbott doesn't care. He wanted to do what was in the best interest and popular with the people. How much power does he wield throughout the state?
An immense amount of power. And it is unique to the state of Texas, the amount of power that the lieutenant governor's office has. Unique to Texas, the lieutenant governor presides over the Senate. So nothing happens in the Senate unless he wants it to.
Got it. So he's got an immense amount of power.
And unlike some other states, there's a misconception that the lieutenant governor is like the vice president to the governor. They don't run on the same ticket. They are political rivals. They don't run our combined ticket. The governor didn't choose the lieutenant governor as his running mate. These are two very different offices that are often political rivals, and they must work together, and they do. The lieutenant governor has a good relationship with Greg Abbott, and they like to talk to that. But you can also see some very, very clear differences in their approach, in their agendas, and on how laws get made. So the lieutenant governor wields. Oh yeah, it's a very unique position in our democracy.
Okay. I mean, I guess to wrap, where do you see us a year from now in Texas in terms of the overall industry? You think we're kind of streamlined? Do you see regulations and we're starting to roll out what this special session is going to move forward? Or is it kind of just, is there a certain chance here that it all just unravels and it stays with the system that we have now within the state of Texas? Because I was reading earlier that is an option. If nothing comes out of the special session, it's just going to stay status quo.
It is. Like I said, the lieutenant governor does have a lot of power, and ultimately that's going to be his decision. I think if he really forces and plays hardball with the Senate, it could backfire, as it already has, and we may get nothing except the status quo. I think a year from now, you're going to see a regulated market, one that is going along just as it is now, that is even more compliant, that is even more lab tested, that has age gating, that has child-proof packaging, that gets out, all the child appealing type packaging. And it's really up to the lieutenant governor if that is going to be a voluntary compliance that good operators are doing because it's the right thing to do. And they're doing that a year from now so that we don't get this in the 2027 session, or if it's an actual law that gets passed with his involvement and with all these lawmakers sitting down. But I don't think a ban is ever going to happen in the state of Texas. Fundamentally, the legal grounds, the Constitution won't allow for it. Okay. I think that's noted. I think that's why Governor Abbott decided to veto, because he didn't want to go up against that lawsuit and ultimately get knocked down in court and just have it in years of just convoluted litigation. One thing that you did bring up that I am curious to know, how sophisticated is the consumer in Texas? Are they looking for lab tested 5-panel product, or are they kind of just
I see a hemp dispensary. I assume that that's kind of like what I can buy. They go in and out, and it's not really a very well educated consumer. They're just buying product at the end of the day.
It's getting there. And
Okay.
and this process has really brought a lot of spotlight onto the industry, which I think is a very good thing. And all my companies, all the companies I work with, put education as kind of the first thing and the most important thing, because an educated customer is a long-term customer. That's how you build loyalty, right? Is get them to understand the products they're taking, why it's more expensive than the $5 pre-roll you could get at the gas station, why you don't want sprayed on Delta 8 distillate flower. And I think a more informed public is a very good thing for the industry. And I've been really, really happy to see the kind of growth in consumer knowledge as people start to understand what the different cannabinoids are, right? Initially it was like, oh, it's an alphabet soup. What is CBN and CBG? But now you're getting customers that are saying, hey, I just want those CBN gummies because I know they're not going to get me high, but they're going to help me sleep better than my melatonin. And it is encouraging. That's why we do it, right? It is encouraging every time you see that kind of customer. It's a really, really good thing to see. And I think our level of education is just going to continue to rise from here.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, I think we've seen it in the maturation of markets. You see customers going from price and THC percentage, graduating into looking into terpene profiles, minor cannabinoids, the sophistication and the education that the consumers learn as the market starts to mature is pretty much been in lockstep with every market that we've seen. But this has been great. I definitely appreciate your insights. Obviously, congratulations on the win. Hopefully there's some continued momentum in this in terms of regulation. And the market gets to shape up to where it can be moving forward. But this has been great. Look forward to having you on hopefully in a couple months from now after this special session, and we can get another download onto what's going on the ground in Texas.
Absolutely, Anthony. Anytime. Happy to be on.
Thank you. Well, that was quite insightful. It's nice to get an operator's perspective from the Texas market. I know we talk about it a lot. We make a lot of assumptions within it, and I mean it's one that I haven't really been down in the ground to see, but obviously it's going to be a big market moving forward, and I think that this headline is not going anywhere anytime soon. But I mean, with further ado, let's get into Insider's Edge, sponsored by ATACH with Mr. Bronstein. We've got a lot to go. All right, sir.
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. Flying solo again. It's third episode in a row without Mr. Shad.
Is he over in Europe? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, he was over in Germany for Mary Jane, and then his travel plans got a little screwed up, so he just got back. He actually just landed back in Canada. I think about an hour ago. Where are you coming from us today? You in PA or you down in Texas?
I'm in Pennsylvania today. And obviously watching closely what's going on in DC and a couple other states that we've got that we're monitoring that have cropped up, and obviously big news in Texas over the weekend. I think that what we saw here was just really interesting politics that played out around this and continue really to play out around this issue. And I think that when you looking forward and there are a lot of interesting things that I think that the governor said, as well as the lieutenant governor in kind of their back and forth volley on this. And it's interesting because you wonder, you go through a process and you're going to get to a regulated market, right? And I think that it's arguable that in when you look at a state like Florida, that Florida had legislation on the table to get to a regulated market, and they did not close where they needed to get in the last session. So the question is, can they work around in Texas right now in this session a place where they get to reasonable regulation? It's interesting, but I haven't heard anybody talk about, at least in the back and forth, the synthetic issue. Right, which continues to be, and in Florida, it was the big issue. Like it became the big issue between the House and the Senate. I think that when we focus on the legalization of natural THC products, does what happened in Texas lead to a essentially an adult use hemp market, right? That is protected under state law, right? But what does that mean? In other states that have had synthetics, even ones that were probably more liberal in terms of adult use, what we would call adult use hemp, which is a which is a way to describe what a state did prior to kind of legalizing marijuana in a traditional way. And by the way, we're in a very Republican territory now, in conservative territory when talking about Texas, as well as other states that might, come online. So the question here is, does that mark the difference with how regulation is going to be? And remember, federally tonight, interestingly enough, there is a markup on appropriations that will address federal farm bill language. So it's going to be interesting to see where everything, where everything plays out. But I think that in Texas, what we see is that there really needs to be, and across the country, there needs to be regulatory parity, right?
Correct.
It's natural.
That's the problem.
It's natural. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Right? That's the problem. So everybody is, what you have here is you have a lot of fighting that is going on around that, both from, from folks who oppose legalization, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also kind of where people think that how legalization should be implemented. There is not a clear consensus model. There are several models, I think, that are floating around. And what the most important thing here is to be able to preserve a state's right to be able to do it, right? We want all states to do it, right? Not every state is going to want to do it. Some states may do it the way Texas eventually winds up doing it, right? Which we hope is, knock out synthetics, address that issue. I don't think that there should be products that are sold as hemp that are chemically converted into essentially synthetic THC products, right? Yeah. That's a big public health and safety issue, I think, that we've got going on that. Reasonable regulation around the products. And we're about to see. I mean, the governor said, we want this regulated akin to alcohol.
He said the A word, yeah.
Said the A word, right?
I was surprised to see that.
That we said that in Colorado. We've said that in other states. Here we have a conservative governor of Texas saying regulate like alcohol, right? But what does that mean? That may mean different things in different states, right? Correct. It means something different to regulate like alcohol in Pennsylvania than it does in Texas.
I was just going to say PA is a different animal. And in the South, you go to some states, they don't sell alcohol until 11 a.m. on Sundays, or they don't even sell alcohol sometimes on Sundays. It's just nuanced. There's no blanket congruency between alcohol regulations within a lot of these states. But you brought up the appropriations bill. Are you hearing anything about where that could land? Because I've heard in Texas, obviously, certain companies are lobbying that were probably got the veto across the line. Those same companies, from what I've heard, have PACs and have power in Washington and are throwing around their influence as well as it relates to the appropriations bill or the appropriations committee around the farm bill. So, I mean, do you have any expectations for that markup or hearing anything of where it could land?
We think that the markup from the conversations is likely to go through. And the markup, and I think that that's been, fairly acknowledged at this point across a number of avenues. And Congress is going to be talking about this issue, in the same way that.
So do you think Abbott is playing 4D chess and he vetoed SB 3 knowing that appropriations language as it relates to the farm bill could be coming down the pipe out of committee and land on re-rating the definition within the farm bill, which would then render it all useless?
It was interesting because I don't think so. And here's why I don't think so. I think that they looked at federal law. So generally when you're in that office, like you try to make a distinction, and he was an attorney general. You try to make a distinction of where you think federal law is. And I think that he doesn't have it read. When he made his comments about federal law, I don't think that it was totally read into where things are going, because they talked about a couple of different cases where essentially some of the judges in those cases, but also we would think that they would uphold the ability for states to regulate these products, and some of the case law that he's mentioning, he's not really utilizing for that purpose. So I think that they got to a spot where they sat there and they said, okay, this is politically popular from our vantage point, right? How do we back end into that, right? And they made a measured calculation, in my view, of the politics. I think they made a measured calculation of the politics. And here's the thing. We've been arguing for years as a cannabis industry that politics should be taken into account, right? Yeah. And a lot of times that has not been the case where it has been taken up. Okay. In this case, I think that there was political calculus that was involved here. Now, was it political calculus against the lieutenant governor, right? Did the lieutenant governor make it easier for what the governor?
I think he definitely did.
I think he did too.
I think the lieutenant governor created a rallying cry around the SB3 ban. I think if Dan Patrick doesn't put his foot in his mouth, there wouldn't have been such as big of an uprising around SB3 to begin with, because the inflection point where everybody just got voracious in terms of, hey, this makes no sense, was that ass backwards press conference that he had. And the press conference he had this afternoon was just as worse. It's just as bad. I get it. He's a reefer madness, prohibitionist, geriatric. Nothing wrong with being a geriatric. He's just on the wrong side of history. But I think he was his own worst enemy in this entire thing. And I didn't realize he wielded so much power in the state of Texas as he does. Yeah.
And I think that the campaigning was effective, right? Yeah. Like it was effectively run. You basically had a situation, I think, from a political perspective, where there was a lot of pressure that was mobilized, right? Mm-hmm. So you saw a campaign run. Now, here's the thing with the legislature, though. The legislature, when it did have the opportunity, okay, to pass, like say what the governor is saying is, all right, we want to regulate like alcohol. Well, where the legislature was, I think, even without the lieutenant governor necessarily putting his finger on the scale, was a lot more conservative, likely, than what's being described there, right? You were sort of seeing more along the lines of, okay, here's what limitations would be, right? It would be knocking out certain products that were going to happen. And then it got, then the bill got amended back to what it started out with, right? Where the House wasn't exactly where the Senate was. And then they did what they did. And so the question is that regulatory structure enough? Okay, what we have found in these campaigns is that people look at the regulatory structure and they're like, well, we'd rather have no regulatory structure than, when it gets down to it, we'd rather have no regulatory structure than have any regulatory structure.
Yeah,
okay.
It's easier.
It's easier. So it's like, all right, let's talk about what those regulatory structures are. So as an industry, to get legal, to get compliant, you need regulatory structure. Mm-hmm. And when we look at this at the federal level, okay, this isn't, and I would caution people about the way that they read federal law right now. Same week, we saw DEA raids in Texas.
Yeah.
All right. We're seeing court rulings where we're seeing certain court rulings around the country. Okay. We have a we have a situation where at the federal level, irrespective of THC, whether it comes from hemp or THC, whether it comes from marijuana, that the THC is still impermissible under the Food, Drugs, and Cosmetics Act, right?
Correct.
There's an argument around where it is, from a controlled substance standpoint relative to what the Farm Bill did. There are arguments that are had around these things, but it is not the case. It is the case that if you do believe that it's decontrolled, that's far from being federally legal.
Correct.
Right. There needs to be a path. There needs to be a pathway towards legality. And one of the things here that's interesting at the state level and from a state level perspective is we have this idea, right, that's been tested over the last several years of, okay, well, cannabis is legalized in a number of different states, and then we'll get some level of federal action. But there hasn't been a whole lot of federal action.
So, question, do you think if Texas gets this right, that reverberates into the federal conversation and starts to open people's eyes to, hey, this is maybe how we should be doing this, versus the hyper-fragmented market that we're seeing on a state-by-state basis and just creating congruency as it relates to THC regulation?
We might see a change in politics before we see a change in the actual congruency of what the marketplace is, because in a state level marketplace, right, like Texas could decide something and then the state next to it could decide something else, right?
Correct.
Oklahoma could decide something else, then they could decide something else from Texas. Okay. And that played out a lot, right? We're in a world right now where alcohol regulation wasn't always what it was, right? We're 100 plus years past sort of the start of when things were happening. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So right now what we have pockets that are incongruent with each other around the whole idea that there isn't regulatory parity around THC.
Yep.
To begin with. Okay. And then we have these what are honestly designer drug products that are popping up and being sold, sometimes as hemp, that are sometimes manufactured from the plant, sometimes not, right? But still sold under that, right? Still sold under that label. So we have a lot of challenges, and without the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act and without federal recognition, it's still going to be hard, right? When you look at like outside investment, when you look at capital markets, right? When you look at kind of what happened in Texas, okay, because we still don't know where Texas is going to land, right?
Correct.
It's not where it was, right? But we don't know where it's going to be. So the question is the risk de-risked enough to see?
No.
Right. Well, I
No.
think that's the answer.
The problem with cannabis, with the cannabis industry, especially from a capital market standpoint, there was so much capital allocated to this industry freely flowing around from, let's say, 2016 to 2019, sophisticated capital as well as high net worth and a bunch of other money, and that money has seen not a very good return, if we're being completely honest, and it's just been completely eyes open to federal inaction. The capital markets, I don't think, really start to open up and flow freely unless we get federal reform coming straight from DC.
If you're a large beverage company,
Yeah.
okay, you're watching what these brands are doing.
100%.
But I think that without federal regulatory clarity, you're selling an alcohol product, it becomes much harder, and there are exceptions, of course, but it becomes harder to assess what that risk looks like for you in that landscape. And I think one of the things that we thought was like, okay, we'll see these large companies that are rush in, and to be sure, like there are companies that are interested, but like they're basically like, okay, we have to figure out what it is that the law is that settles. And that opportunity for somebody who's an entrepreneur is different than an opportunity for
definitely.
Like an alcohol.
Yeah, the economy is a scale or orders of magnitude different for each of those parties. For an entrepreneur, it's quite attractive. I mean, but the scale's not there for like a Coca-Cola or an Anheuser-Busch right now as far as the risk reward goes. I mean, outside of Texas, we've been talking a lot about Pennsylvania. What's going on in PA? Have we had any conversations go further down the line into, let's say, getting some sort of tangible bill? What are you hearing coming out of the halls in PA? Hopefully something good.
Yeah, there is a lot going on. There's a lot going on in PA. So there are a lot of conversations. What I would say is that the House Budget Appropriations Chair was over the weekend called out Senate Republicans for stalling on the legalization discussion. We've had Senate Republicans, Senator Pittman said that, he doesn't see marijuana on the table right now in this particular budget period. That was on Friday.
Yeah.
The governor has pushed back on that. And there's this push and pull going on in the legislature around the budget. And there's a question of, all right, will the entire budget be done over the next couple of weeks? Okay, so Senator Pittman's like, I don't think we get to an agreement until like mid-July. And it might be, there's some speculation that they might pass a general appropriations bill in the next couple of weeks and then leave the rest of the budget for the fall. They may take the entire budget and pass it over the summer. They may throw their hands up in the air. Like, there's a lot of questions about what's going on federally in terms of a federal funding perspective that I think is getting in the way of closing a budget deal quickly. And I also think that Senate Republicans have been slow in trying to deal with this. And there's a hearing.
But are they doing that? Are they doing that on purpose? Slow playing it because they know that time can kind of elapse here in terms of ones that aren't for it?
I think that the strategy for them to slow play it around this particular conversation is that if they move legislation or they show any interest and indication, it's immediately going to go on the table. Which means they'll have to enter in negotiations, and they have other priority issues right now, such as gaming, which they're going to move probably a gaming bill today. Right. Yeah. And the House is going to want something for that. Right. What do they want? Do they want legalization?
Got it.
Right.
So there's some horse trading. There's some horse trading that can start to. Okay. Got it.
There's some horse trading that can start to happen, because I think also what Senate Republicans are doing are pushing up the value of the trade. Right. They're pushing up the ante of what a trade would be, or trying to. For a cannabis legalization bill, because they want to get as much as they can.
I don't blame them. I'd be doing the same thing if I was them. Get as much as I can on the table, and then execute it. That makes sense. What do you? Is there any way you're leaning, which would be the most likely outcome here?
It's hard to say what the most likely outcome is right now, because the horse trading is still going on. I think that when the gaming bill goes over, it'll be interesting to see how people talk about the cannabis bill from a Democratic caucus standpoint, because they're already kind of setting up that conversation. If that conversation happens, and then tomorrow there's a hearing in the Senate on intoxicating hemp.
Yeah.
And it's Senator Laughlin and Senator Laughlin's committee. So how do you talk about the intoxicating hemp issue in Pennsylvania without talking about cannabis legalization in some form or fashion?
You have to. They're binary almost. Yeah.
They're binary. So I think that some people think, okay, well, that's a stall tactic. And other people think like, well, actually, if they talk about this issue and they pass a bill out of committee, that it'll be enough to get legalization moving, because the thing that they're holding the hearing on is a cannabis regulatory board for Pennsylvania, where they would house the medical marijuana program under that Cannabis Regulatory Board and then house the intoxicating hemp under that same regulatory board. So basically regulate all THC under.
They're talking about that in Pennsylvania right now.
They're talking about that, and that's what the hearing is about. It's on creating a cannabis control board. So the question is, if you are to have a cannabis control board and there's a need for it in the budget around this particular bill, and they have trouble getting this thing out of committee, right? Or getting a full legalization bill out of committee, that would be one way to move the conversation forward into budget negotiations for full legalization. So there's some speculation that's going on around, well, why are they doing this as opposed to that? You could look at it and be like, all right, well, they're looking to stall the issue and create kind of a half, measure prior to, or they're looking to put a vehicle out that they can attach adult use to. And I will say this, there is like Democrats on the House are not going to go for a bill that does not do adult use legalization and moves the medical marijuana program outside of the Department of Health without legalization, right? Because they have questions about how that program is run, and they are looking to actively address that and make sure that it's not just without a clear signal of how things are going to be regulated in a final state without passing that. So it's getting interesting. I mean, it's definitely getting interesting.
So for those watching, should they expect to hear stuff transpire, I guess, as this week progresses? I mean, we could start to hear rumblings coming out of this hearing tomorrow, going into like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of this week. And then let's just say that starts to snowball into maybe some semblance of meaningful direction as to where this could go.
This week's an important week. I think that language that if it drops on, and remember, we were waiting and we have been waiting on language from Senator Laughlin to drop so that this discussion could continue in the Senate. That language hasn't dropped yet. Right? We've seen, different versions of the bill. That to me is an important indication. And I think because they're not ready to negotiate, we haven't seen that language drop, right? If a language drops, there's a lot more to negotiate off of than if there's no bill floating around. And I'll give you an idea. The gaming bill that they're moving today is like 3 pages, right? Because they're going to take it. Yeah, they're going to take it. But I promise you, the issue is not a 3-page issue.
Correct.
Okay. It's a vehicle that folks are going to move around to try to hang other language off of. So the question is all right, is that what's going on right now? And I don't see politically how you close this budget deal from a Republican standpoint. And I genuinely mean that. It's like, how do you close it? You've said everything that you're against, but you haven't actually said what you would accept at the table and you're
And they have to accept something, correct?
Yes, they have to accept something.
Something. Okay.
Right. So why do that when you can lay the groundwork for the framework for this? Okay. When, they're sort of leaving this issue out there. So I would say that cannabis is around the conversation and it's going to take this week to get it in the conversation.
Okay. So next Monday, we should be talking about some juicy tidbits or at least some momentum that PA has gotten following this week with this hearing.
Or the entire budget could be stalled out too, right? If they start throwing food at each other. And we've been in protracted summer budget situations where all right, it has run long. To me, this doesn't feel like a run long situation.
Okay.
It's a run longer situation, but it just doesn't feel like everybody's at loggerheads over the actual budget. People disagree about cannabis, to be sure, but the overall budget and what's going to be in it, it's not to me, it doesn't feel like, and this could change at a moment's notice, right? It doesn't feel like everything's about to fall apart. It's just that it's intractable right now.
That's good. I mean, that to be honest, that's all we can ask for, especially with these political situations. It's as long as we're not looking at no's or just adversarial commentary or roadblocks from the powers that be in the political houses. It's usually bodes well for at least what we want to get done.
I think that's right. And it's important to make a huge push right now and get this done. It just is. I mean, could this be done in the fall? It could be done in the fall, right? Could this be done? I mean, Pennsylvania is a year-round legislature.
Okay.
But around the budget is a really good shot in order to create the amount of pressure to get something done. And look, it's like any other legislature. Unless there's pressure, people won't act. So a budget situation creates that pressure. If they do a half measure and it's like, all right, we're going to do a budget and we'll pass, some portion of that budget, and then we're going to come back, the pressure hasn't alleviated. There's still a need for that revenue and funding. It just, they left stuff on the table when they go about doing that. And, they could either do that because, all right, we know that there's other funding that's needed for the budget, and they don't necessarily want to make a decision on this now, or they could just take care of all of this right now. These options are all on the table. They're all live.
Okay. Anything else on the docket that you're looking at this week? It's pressing in any of the states outside. I mean, obviously, I think we've all got our plates full with Texas and PA watching it transpire this week, especially on Monday. But anything else on the state level that you're looking at?
We're continuing to watch a bunch of states, but folks are also wrapping up. They're also wrapping up legislative sessions too. Okay. So there's still some actions. We've seen some AG enforcement actions that we're watching fairly closely, around the country on some of these issues. And we're obviously continuing to watch from a federal perspective what could happen this week.
Okay. I guess we will take it in stride. That's how we do everything around here. But the PA insight is much appreciated. And obviously, Texas is going to do Texas things. I think we've got a good starting point, and hopefully we see some semblance of regulation there, because I would hate for this to kind of go into special session, fall out of favor, and then it's just status quo that gets upheld in Texas. We look forward to next Monday having you on, and hopefully we got some exciting news about PA, or at least some language to go off of that'll start to tell us which direction we're heading into.
There's a lot of pressure. There's rallies going on right now. You see a language drop around here, and things can start moving. I mean, all the supporters right now are here and banging on doors.
Okay, that is good to know. This has been great. I think it's rounding out the session. We'll be back to our regular scheduled program with Shad next Monday, but definitely appreciate the insights, and it's good to catch up, Mike.
Great. We'll see you in a little bit.
See you next week. That has been a lot of information today. I know that everybody's kind of on edge with what's going on within Texas, with what's going on in PA. We didn't even get to Ohio, which we touched on very tepidly last week with Trent. I've got an interview tomorrow with Mark Yusko with Metaplanet in the Bitcoin space, Morgan Creek Digital. That'll be coming out later in the week. And not sure what the guests are right now slated for Wednesday and Thursday, but Shad will definitely be back on Wednesday for our regularly scheduled show. In the meantime, appreciate everybody. Hope everyone had a good Monday, and see everyone Wednesday.
So, what'd you think of all that information? Some interesting stuff that we just learned once again here at the TDR Traded Black podcast. Let's keep the conversation going. So leave your comments below. We'd love to get your feedback. As usual, if you have time, make sure to like, subscribe, and smash on that bell for all notifications. And stay connected with us here at the Trade to Black podcast. Thanks for watching, everyone.